Right, well, hello, and thank you for joining this fireside chat, part of the Future of Media Trading event being hosted by MediaTel. This session will be focused on knowing your audience. My name is Emma Newman, and I am Pubmatic's Chief Revenue Officer for EMEA. Pubmatic, for those not familiar, is an independent technology platform that delivers superior revenue to publishers by being the SSP of choice for agencies and advertisers. Now, at a time when there's almost too much choice, too much content, too many models, way too many platforms, and lots of devices, more of everything for audiences and brands to navigate, is it possible that the one thing that everyone wants, which is relevancy, is one of the things that there isn't enough of? The other thing that there is arguably not enough of is scale, especially when we think about premium publishers. Couple the lack of scale with the removal of the cookie and therefore an addressable audience, and one might wonder if there is any chance of brands and publishers of A, really knowing their audience, and B, being able to engage with them in a relevant way. What if in the future we had convenience and scale overlaid with addressability and accessibility, thereby allowing brands to work with publishers to deliver the right message to the right audience at the right time across the right platform, providing high quality, highly relevant content, and thereby safeguarding both the publisher and advertiser relationship with the audience, and dare I say it, safeguarding digital publishing. Sounds great in theory, but how do we turn theory into reality? Joining me today to discuss this, and I'm sure many other topics, are Alexis Faulkner. Alexis leads the UK Futures advertising team at Mindshare. In this role, she is focused on supporting the agency as it embraces digital transformation and leading a team of around 140 specialists running search, social and programmatic display activities. This is a role using the culmination of her skills in business transformation built from her earlier work, leading business excellence teams in AOL, technology consultancy at ITV, and most recently running the central programmatic buying team at Group M. And Nick Hewitt. Nick is the commercial director of The Guardian, joining in July 2013. Prior to this appointment, he was the Group Sales Director of Telegraph Media Group, and prior to that, spent 17 years in commercial radio with both Capital Radio and Virgin Radio, where he was also Commercial Director. So welcome to you both.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Right, let's kick off with the topic of the moment, COVID-19. I'm not sure we can have any conversation unless we tackle this at the beginning. So over the past few months, we've seen an acceleration of digital consumption, consumers moving even faster online, and a general change of behaviour and attitude to engaging with both analogue and digital content. Now, Nick, as one of the UK's premium publishers, how has this shift affected your publishing and advertising strategy, and how are you responding? And specifically, what changes are you making to your technology platforms to address this challenge?
Hi, Emma. Thank you. Yeah, I suppose like so many media owners, you're seeing really big changes going on in terms of consumption. So whether that's in TV or whether that's radio, or in our case with publishing, we have never seen so much human attention aggregated around our journalism. I think coronavirus is now numbers 1 through to 40 in our top traffic days of all time. So I think that beats Trump, that beats Brexit, that beats the EU referendum. It's the world's biggest search term ever. And yet we've really been unsuccessful in being able to monetize it. Why is that? Well, the advertisers who are active are nowhere near as big as the whole categories who have disappeared. So there's no cars, there's no fashion, there's no travel. And on top of that demand issue, you've got brand safety blocking of coronavirus content, which has increased enormously. Therefore, the fill rate has decreased, and therefore the eCPM has decreased as well. So we've done what all businesses in our position would have done. In that sense, we're a bit like a retailer with stock to shift. You know, we've dropped price floors, we've made packages and offers, we've created simple ways to advertise if you are in the market, and we've made sure we've kept in touch with customers. But actually, it's all been very difficult, and I know we're not alone in that. You know, demand is slow. So our job, we think is, you know, it's always easy to be forgotten. It's particularly easy to be forgotten at the moment when you actually can't physically be in front of people. So if we can't win in this short term, we're going to try and win in the long term and stay remembered.
Yeah. And have you used technology in any way to help you, as you've sort of, you mentioned, you've lowered your floor prices and you've sort of built packages. Has that all sort of been manual, or have you worked with your technology partners to help you do this as well?
No, we have. We've worked with technology partners. It's interesting, we get a steady flow of people saying we can help your business. We've had lots more of that in the last few weeks as well, and trying to make sure that you kiss the prince, if you like, and not the frog has always been tricky, actually, as a big publisher like us. But there are one or two partners who've come through recently that we've started working with, who again we hope will actually be beneficial to us. As a video partner, for example, we've started trialing with. And so, yeah, we will engage with the right technology partners, and we've done that. Dropping price floors is an easy decision to make, but to what price you drop it to, and where can you see demand start to resurface if you get that price right? It's those sort of decisions where you rely on technology.
Yeah. Alexis, a lot of advertisers have changed, their strategy over the last few months, media planning, creative content, possibly shifting budgets around as well. What are you doing to help them navigate this ever-changing landscape, and what role does technology play for you?
Yep, very interesting time for advertisers, and I would absolutely mirror what Nick's saying, is that the premium brands, the car brands, are really challenged right now, as well as the ones you'd expect to be out in the market. But we do still have lots of brands working with us. For us, it's been a really big time of planning. So many replanning and reforecasts to try and look ahead to what we can do and how we can adapt. As Nick says, we've got brilliant supply available to us, brilliant pricing in the marketplace across all media. In fact, the challenge to us is trying to find the right fit for our advertisers at the time. And so we spend a lot of time looking into research around COVID-19 and trying to predict consumer behaviours. So we have a lot of our vendors that are coming to us with information, the likes of Captify, Pinterest, Facebook, constantly releasing reports that look at search behaviours or social behaviours, so that we can start looking at what people are doing and adapting them online. But secondly, we're looking a lot at mobile vendors, in fact, to try and look at footfall, not so much because we're expecting to see much in the footfall data for the UK right now, but we're interested in European data where countries are coming out of lockdown, and we want to see what changes as populations go out of their houses, where there's confidence and where there's not. And then finally, we do a lot of research, so panel data, our own kind of bespoke studies that we look at week on week to start seeing changes as we go through the COVID period. And that's both in kind of consumer confidence around various areas, their behaviours, their interests, their worries and their fears. And that group of data together, all of this learning that we can now take both from kind of people's internet data, online sources, but also from what they tell us in the survey data, is how we can help our advertisers best predict what's going to happen for their businesses and support them as they need to adapt going through this time. Great.
We're hearing a lot that advertisers and publishers are shifting to digital, and that the decline of linear TV will be accelerated. The tech giants potentially are feeling the short-term impact on the SMEs, but in the long term, new changes due to COVID-19 will, I believe, result in the walled gardens having a more dominant position. I mean, if you imagine the data that Amazon is currently gathering on consumer buying patterns, it has to at some point give them a huge data advantage. I mean, is it really realistic to think that premium publishers can compete against the walled gardens in delivering a desirable audience to buyers at scale? So Nick, how are you ensuring that your audience is both addressable and of a big enough scale to capture spend from those aforementioned tech giants?
It's a good question, but it's a really interesting question, actually, because the framing of it highlights, I think, the issue of the digital ad market in its entirety, which is where we treat everything online the same, when it isn't. The walled gardens are always going to have probably the best audience data, and I think they've done a brilliant job of persuading advertisers that that's what digital marketing is all about. But I don't think it is. I think it's more subtle than that, and there are very different players on across the entire digital ecosystem. Take us as quality publishers. What do we have, and what is unique to us online? Well, it's A, professionally curated quality content, and B, deep human engagement. And that comes with practice, and that comes with trust, and publishers like us have got nearly 200 years of it. So if you're a marketer and you're after ad impressions, then you're going to go to the platforms. You know, they've got tons of them, and they're cheap. If you're going to want retail and bottom of the funnel, you're going to go to Amazon, and all of that makes sense. But if you want a share of consumers' attention, if you want to try and build a brand that's going to not just be online, but if you understand where consumers are moving to, they are moving online, then actually go to publishers. You know, there are, I love this stat, there are 175 online mattress businesses in the market, and they're all selling essentially the same thing. So which ones are going to survive? And now I would make a case that the ones that are going to survive are the ones with the best brands. And how do you build a brand these days? How do you build a brand online? And that is where consumers are. That is the question. I think that is what publishers can help us do, as opposed to compete with the walled gardens in what they're really good at. So can we move the game to what we're really good at? I think that is more the question I'd like to discuss.
Okay. Alexis, just thinking about what Nick said there, do you think premium publishers are doing enough to capture spend? And if not, you know, what else can they do beyond building the brand and having that audience engagement? Is there something else that you're looking for?
I think we see what Nick talks about there, in that if you look at the teams and agencies that are working with premium publishers more now, it's actually probably less your digital buying teams and more your partnerships teams, because when we really work well is when we get these deeper interactions and we look at the bigger scale takeovers and buys and how we can really ingrain with that product. We've done a load of research at the Group M level into kind of what makes a good advertising buy in digital. And to Nick's point, in the brand space, where we can measure brand uplift or product uplift or any of that understanding piece, we really find a very high correlation with the premium content. So anywhere where you stay longer on page because you're reading and you're more engaged actually has a really positive effect with your kind of brand goals that we're trying to do there. So we are really focused on trying to buy more into that content when our goals aren't so lower funnel focused. Mm-hmm. And it really therefore depends on where we can find those kind of KPIs and where we can achieve the best results. I think the challenge is that publishing world is quite hard to interact with sometimes. When we have the opportunity just to go into one portal like Facebook, and we can do everything from projecting and forecasting, as well as data overlays in one place, it's a lot easier for us to operate and navigate that landscape sometimes than it is to operate and navigate a landscape of thousands of publishers where we're trying to evaluate. And most of the big publishers will have research themselves or will have insights that are really useful to us, but there hasn't been that correlation across publishers where we can look at scale ways to do that. So I think as we move forward and we progress, it's certainly interested in any of the initiatives that allow us to access publisher data across the board a little bit more freely, or look for synergies between that landscape so it's easier for us to operate, as well as being able to do these unique partnerships where we invest a bit more into that individual publisher and really go after what is unique about them. And the balance of those two things is what will best help us kind of maintain that landscape moving forward.
Yeah.
And I think that's where Ozone has a role, right? And I think that's one of the reasons why it was set up, because Ozone is the size of Facebook in the UK when you add together the cumulative audiences of the 4 founding publishers. And it is a recognition that individual publishers, if you're working at an agency, is actually is hard work, and you could describe it as inefficient. I wouldn't, but I know some people might. So Ozone does help in that regard. And it's interesting actually, during the COVID crisis that we've had, is that Ozone has done better, I'd say, than most of the publishers I know of in terms of the numbers. They actually have been, where there is ad money, they seem to have been able to pick it up. And I do wonder whether this actually will be, it's that old Obama's chief of staff line about don't waste a good crisis. And I think actually Ozone could do really well out of this, and could position us, as we're a quarter shareholder, position us as a very good place to do business going forward if you're after that scale buy.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. And even just outside of the UK, we're definitely starting to see more of an interest in publisher consortia. I know that that's something that periodically comes around, but I certainly see more momentum there. And I think partly that's been driven by the fact that publishers are starting to trust each other a bit more. I think when consortia have potentially gotten together in the past, one of the big sticking points is that publishers are not prepared to share data. That's one of the big things that we hear.
I think that's true. I agree with that. I think that's a good observation. And I think, though, that I think this is the necessity of, right,
Yeah.
is of, if you're going to compete, we know where the ad money is moving. Everyone has seen the pie charts. We know where it's going. And so what can you do?
Yeah.
Scale is something that is a requirement now. So in that way, your question is absolutely right. And therefore, can you come together? And I think, it's fascinating, right? Because one of the reasons that publishers have always been competitive is because editorially, they've always tried to scoop each other, right? That has been the business. And so that filters down through to sales teams. And it takes a while. You don't just get rid of a culture like that. It does take some time. But I have to say, from an Ozone perspective, after 2.5 years now, we're a long way down the track, actually. And it is moving forwards in a really powerful direction.
And I just want to add to that. I think it's really important to not just think about how you unify the publisher data, which is really important, and a kind of ease of operations, but also how we bring advertisers into that. So a lot of our advertisers are really taking their data sets very seriously, and we know that tends to drive the best performance that we see online as well. So I'm really interested in the technologies that allow us to use their data, and trust is a big issue there as well. No one wants to release their data into the ecosystem and be used elsewhere. So there are companies coming out that are kind of doing these I don't know, different ways that you can share data but without anyone actually taking control. So companies like InfoSum, where you can compare data sets, no one gets to see each other's, but you start looking at the correlation between them. And I'm fascinated to see how that might change the industry to allow us to be able to maybe build trust and relationships where we haven't been able to bridge those gaps previously, reduce the burden of compliance, because there's a lot of compliance around GDPR and worries about legalities there. And if we can find these technology routes through, I think it really will change what we're able to do.
Yeah.
Again, I agree, and we've just started working with InfoSum, and InfoSum is this idea of the bunker, the idea that you put your data into a safe place, and an advertiser puts their data into a safe place, and it gets shared, but it doesn't get shared back to either place. And that, I think it's called the clean room as well. I believe bunker and clean room are is terminology that is more or less the same thing. And again, I think these are smart solutions. And you'll see more of them.
The big portals won't play in this game right now as well, so it is where the publisher maybe can steal a march.
Absolutely. So we've talked a little bit about data here, which is sort of brings me to my next question, because obviously, publishers have this first party data. It's very valuable. I think they're starting to really realize the value of that data. And Nick, as we hurtle to ever faster to a world where we don't have cookies, and to a world where this first party data is king, and even more valuable, one would argue, what should publishers be doing to ensure that they capture this data, and they then realize the value of it?
I mean, this is a question, isn't it? Because it sort of takes you back. Do you remember the world pre-COVID-19? All any of us were talking about was the world without cookies. Yeah. And it seems like we've forgotten what that was all about, understandably so. But it clearly hugely important. And since Apple in particular clamped down on the use of third-party cookies, publishers across the globe have seen their cost per thousands on Apple devices slide. And then if you think that Apple have about a 50% share of mobile devices in the UK, then that is a problem for everyone, whether you're a buyer or a seller, as the profile of Apple device owners tends to be more affluent, and advertisers tend to want to reach them as a consequence. So if you're trying to sell a car, that becomes your problem as well as mine. I mean, someone at our work described it as this 50% as one of our dinosaurs is missing. So, like many publishers, we're trying to find that dinosaur, and we're working with the new generation of DMPs, in our case permitive, to use their edge computing techniques to open up that audience and rescue that dinosaur. In addition to that, we're also trialing a voluntary sign-in scheme at the moment at The Guardian, and we eagerly await the results of that test. It's not a paywall, it doesn't intend to be that, but it's voluntarily asking people to sign in so that we can begin to register that data. The Guardian would prefer not ever to go behind a paywall, because we want our form of liberal journalism to be seen and to influence as wide an audience as possible. But we also understand the necessity for first-party data, as we've got till January 2022 to fix this.
And that's going to come around quicker than we think. Every day feels like the same at the moment. I'm losing complete track of time. Alexis, we've spoken in the past, and you referenced it as well just earlier, that data is not the be-all and end-all for buyers, and there's a lot of nuance involved that perhaps isn't valued as much as it once was. How are you approaching the cookieless world, and what advice can you give to both buyers and publishers to ensure that they're securing the ROI on their ad spend and delivering relevant content and advertising to the end consumer?
Yeah, and there's lots of layers to go through that with any advertiser. I guess the first thing we have to understand is really what the business goals are. And we in digital get very excited by the media goals that we can see and maybe kind of cost per acquisitions and things like that. But often they're not actually our clients' goals. Our clients' goals are whether they're trying to drive their profit or whether they're trying to sell more cars, or what that looks like. Often they aren't the things we can measure online. So we've got to get very good at mapping the actual outcome a business wants back to what we do believe the proxy media KPIs are, and not forget that they're not the be all and end all. Otherwise, you make some really poor decisions. So Nick's just been talking about the value of kind of mobile audiences on Apple. Often, if you looked at just media KPIs, you would optimize away from Apple because you would say, I can't track it, therefore it doesn't exist, therefore it's not worth it for me. But to your point, that they're some of the most affluent users, and if we're not advertising to them, we're missing the point and who we're trying to get in our audience. So we have to be really careful, first of all, on our outcomes approach and really understanding what the business goal is and how we're measuring that. The next bit, I think, is really trying to understand what data is useful. So yes, advertiser data is really powerful, and publisher data is really powerful in understanding their audience. But actually, there's two other things you should think of in there. When we're doing pure performance campaigns, we find bid stream data, or the kind of media data, probably the most powerful thing to optimize towards. And that's the basics like time of day, day of week, all of those things, browser type. And then beyond that, actually, the more interesting data is your business data. So trying to understand your user journey and understand what the triggers are or what the blockers are from you converting is where we get really lots of interest. So I think MediaCom recently did a really nice piece of work in Scandinavia with Specsavers, where they looked at people that couldn't book an appointment because their local Specsavers was full. There were no more appointments, and they changed their algorithm based on whether they had availability or not. And it had a huge business impact. It's business data for them, understanding what their consumers need and then adapting the advertising to do that. So it's really important that we take that into account. And then finally, we really care about quality. So I talked about it already, but trying to understand the formats you're using, how much they're seen on the page, those viewability standards, and doing that across the whole industry has been really important to us. So we have initiatives where we sample data across a number of advertisers to try and pull together a whole understanding of what the publisher ecosystem looks like in terms of quality. And we also constantly do these research pieces to look at how long someone is on page and whether that correlates to what they get as a brand perception moving forward. And the rules around that is what helps us drive our advertising for the future, and I think is what will keep us. So we maybe balance out this audience and quality piece, and we haven't skewed so heavily just audiences for the future.
Yeah, and I think that ties nicely into what Nick said earlier about, premium publishing and quality and brand and all of those kinds of things. I just want to move to another industry hot topic, if I may, which is buyer consolidation, also known as supply path optimization, depending where you sit. Now, as I mentioned at the beginning, we're all operating in a world of almost too much choice. Alexis, faced with all this choice, how do buyers ensure that they're choosing the right path to ensure that they're reaching the audience that they want?
It's a really hard quandary for us to get into, and one of the things that is hardest is to understand all the supply paths there are. I think the reports that have come out recently have shown how many different routes to market there are. Again, we focus on this at the Group M level because the best thing to do is to look at it across the board, and that's the only way we can get scale of data. And we've already consolidated our SSPs that we work with down to 12 because we believe that's where there are the best relationships and the broadest access to data at the same time. The challenge has been for us that we often get advertisers that want to do private marketplaces, or there's bespoke deals that sit outside of those exchanges, and that's where we see the breadth in what we're trying to do. So for us, it's really about understanding the compromises that we're making. So how can we reduce down our supply sources so we get this quality, we can really invest in understanding all the routes to market, but at the same time, make sure we're not cutting out quality supply and that we can actually still work with all the partners that are adding something to the plan. And that's something that we're going to have to keep working on, keep evaluating. But we now are investing a lot to actually go through all of those paths and start looking at, if we're trying to access the Guardian and we want to look at that through the exchanges, what is the best route for us for that, so that we actually focus one way and one direction as opposed to just taking it whatever comes kind of observed to us at that moment in time.
And Nick, have you seen changes in buyer behaviour? And what are you guys doing to ensure that you capture as much advertising spend as possible in this world of consolidation?
Yeah, we have. I mean, Alexis has referenced it already, but we are seeing agencies set up their own marketplaces in the last few months, and that is for us a very interesting development, and we'll happily play in that space with them. We've seen a trend as well in agencies choosing only one supply path. So we saw the Trade Desk recently announced they wanted their SSP partners to only surface one bid request. And then last year, it was an interesting, not an easy trend for us to observe, but last year we saw a decline in private deals, whether that's PMPs or programmatic guaranteed. And I don't think we were the only publisher to see that, but I am wondering now how that trend, or if that trend will be reversed in any way, and if that PwC report will have the impact on buyers who are going to recognise there are still challenges to buying in the open marketplace, despite the improvements of the last couple of years, and whether actually that report signals some sort of return to private buying, but maybe in a more sophisticated and in a more scaled way.
Okay. And finally, as this session is all about knowing your audience, one final question to you both. I'll start with you, Alexis. If there was one thing a technology partner could do to help you find the audience you wanted across premium supply, what would that be?
Ooh, what a great question. I think for me, it goes back to this operational consolidation. So providing us the tools. So I think Nick talked earlier about Ozone and how successful that's been in collating kind of all the news brands. But actually what we haven't seen yet is the tools in our hands that allow us to do that. So the one thing that programmatic did for us as agencies was let us get into what the actual targeting was and understand deeper what actually impacted our buys. Was it the audience? Was it the setup? Was it that we just had a really brilliant optimizer that was sitting and working kind of day in, day out to improve that? We don't want to lose that as we go into this new world. So giving us the tools that allow us to see those audiences, to project out the volume of them, to look at nuances between different types of audiences, understand, is an auto intender on the Guardian the same as an auto intender on the Independent, and what built that, so we know the kind of how reliable it is and the quality around that. If we can get to these kind of tools that allow us to go and investigate that data, then it's a much easier buying route for us to be able to drive the revenue into those places.
Perfect. And Nick, same question, but with a slightly different view. If there was one thing a technology partner could do to help you realise as much value from your audience as possible, what would that be?
This is. I mean, I did enjoy this question, thinking how am I going to answer this, because I've got more than one thing, but you only allowed me one. So anyway, I'd like the industry, the entire advertising industry, to recognise the different role, the different aspects of everything that is online plays, right? We're only going to spend more time online. The rollout of 5G will only accelerate that. There's never been a greater disparity in media consumption between older and younger audiences, and Touchpoints proved that back in February. And that disparity is digital. Younger audiences, 73% of their media time spent on digital, older audiences, 50%. So for me, the frustration is that the advertising community sometimes boils everything online down to really simplistic, it's all performance advertising, and that's the mindset. And I think that's a huge mistake. And therefore, my single wish is for technology to help demonstrate the value of human attention to advertising, to help people understand the role of the publisher online, how often the purchase journey starts with the journalism. That's a long-winded way, in short, of saying I want measurement. I want to see measurement that actually values advertising online in the right way.
Brilliant. Well, I'd like to wrap this session by saying a huge thank you to both Alexis and Nick for joining me today, and obviously to MediaTel for pulling such a diverse and interesting agenda together for the Future of Media Trading event. There has really been a plethora of interesting content and views being shared. And I hope the audience consider this to be one of those. So thank you very much.